Hello, I'm Chris from Chris and Eli, and today we're going to talk about some of my experiences with the VA. Before I dig in, I do want to make sure everyone understands that I am absolutely working with a company to get this taken care of. I do appreciate the feedback and the support and the advice that everybody has given me, but I have reached out to a company. I've been working with them pretty much through the whole process, and I'm just sharing mostly to show people what working with the VA can be like and why, you know, uh, why veterans are just like not a big fan in a lot of situations and a lot of times. Obviously, I can't speak for everybody, but in my experience, it's not been a positive public opinion in the veteran community. We're going to start at the beginning. Over the last 5 plus years, I've noticed a decline in my ability to maintain focus. I've struggled at work, I've struggled at home. There's a few things, and not many, that I've been able to dedicate my attention to. Honestly, over the last 5 to 7 years, I've noticed just a difference in some of my behavior patterns. I would have never walked out on a civilian employer ever, and then I did that in the last 5 years. As an example, maybe it was seven. But since getting out of active duty from then up until that one time I ever did it, I had never done it before, no matter how much I hated the job. And so, I didn't even really hate the job. I was just done. Slowly, I'd stopped playing most video games and really doing many of the things that I used to enjoy. And a lot of it just came down to I just really couldn't. I'd get into a game, I'd start a task. I would do anything, and my brain would just get to a point where it would shut off, completely shut down, and really it had just had enough, and no amount of mental gymnastics could just will me through it. I used to play Fallout, and I had gotten to a point where I struggled to play Fallout, even like I would get 15 minutes into it, and then my brain was just done. So recently, I had an appointment with a third party psychiatrist, which I got in touch with because of the company that I'm working with on getting my comp and pen, which is compensation and pension, getting my disability rating re rated. And I've spoken on this before. This appointment was to get me an unbiased look at my mental health and my state of being and determine if there was a need to increase my rating. We got 15 minutes into the appointment. She said I needed to get tested for ADHD because I had a lot of the classic marker symptoms of it, which at the time I didn't really think anything of. It did match a lot of my symptoms, and we'll kind of dig into that a little bit more in a little bit. But ultimately, I was just like, yeah, okay, maybe I do. I don't know if it could start as an adult, but maybe I do. So I set up an appointment with the local VA clinic. I told them what was going on, and the psychiatrist prescribed Adderall, and it has definitely helped. It's not a cure, it's not perfect. I can't just like sit down and have a normal 8 hour workday like a lot of people can. But what it does help me do is it does help me get through the tedium of some of the things that I have to do. It's still, there are days where I just struggle and I just struggle, but it is a very helpful tool. And I'm not on a high dose, I'm on 15 milligrams, and just the 15 milligrams has been very beneficial for me to be able to kind of function like a normal human. We fast forward a few weeks from there, and I have an appointment with Comp and Pen, which again is compensation and pension. This is probably one of the most awkward appointments I've ever had. It had to be done in the Chicago office, which there's a whole big story about that. It couldn't be telehealth because, why would it be able to? Chicago's only about 60 miles from me, but it takes about 2 hours to make the drive because Chicago traffic is horrible. And the lady I had the appointment with actually spent most of the time just sitting there staring while the other doctor spoke. So it was also kind of a weird interaction. Like she was only there to get combative and to get adversarial when needed to be. Generally speaking, the other doctor just kind of talked and asked questions. And if she didn't like the answer, then she would kind of become, like I said, just a little combative, a little adversarial. It was kind of a weird interaction. And, I don't know if this is how it normally goes. I just know that's how it went for me. And the whole appointment felt very combative. And I went into it I tried to go into it very calmly, but 2 hours in a car in Chicago traffic doesn't do much for me. I got there, I left 2.5 to 3 hours early because You literally never know. Coming from Indiana to Chicago, it could be a 2 hour trip, it could be an hour trip, it could end up being 2.5 hours because you don't know what traffic's going to be like. You don't know what's going to be shut down because of construction. It's just a gamble. Unless you make that commute frequently, it's just rolling dice. So it's one of those where I left, I gave myself adequate time. I got there about 45 minutes early, but it still took me 2 hours and about 15 minutes to get there. And they still didn't get me in until about half an hour after my appointment time. So my appointment time was at 11. I got there at like 10:15, and they didn't get me into the appointment until 11:30. So it was already, not set up to be a very good experience. There were a lot of instances where I was in that appointment where I just felt like she was trying to use circular logic and double speak to try to trip me up and try to catch me in a lie. It's not going to work because I'm not lying. There's no stories to be told. There's no like falsehoods to be, there's no falsehoods that you're going to uncover and dig. I'm just going to be straightforward with you, and I'm just going to tell you, hey, this is what's going on. 2 weeks later, after that appointment, I had the conversation with Comp and Pen to go over the Comp and Pen results. And despite being recommended by the third party for an increase, that psychiatrist was like, no, this guy definitely needs this increase. Like, he is in a position where his disability for PTSD needs to be increased because it is definitely impacting his ability to function as a normal member of society. So they denied it. Comp and Pen denied it, even though she said, yes, do this. And when I was talking to them, they said, hey, we don't do compensation for ADHD. You have ADHD. It says right here on your medical record. Remember, I did get prescribed Adderall not that long beforehand, like 2 to 4 weeks before that. So she was just like, you have ADHD. It says you have ADHD on your medical record. And since adult onset ADHD doesn't exist, we are denying your claim because this is an issue you've had your whole life. And basically, the attitude was like, go pound sand. Except it isn't. It isn't an issue I've had my whole life. This is a fairly recent development. I'm going to be 41 soon, the last 5+ years. So, anywhere from about an eighth to about a quarter of my life, I've been slowly declining. And then also take into account that there are other issues and disorders that have symptoms that are very similar to ADHD. Post traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, like you could draw a Venn diagram with ADHD, PTSD, and uh, TBI, and there's a big overlap in that middle of symptoms that just like all of them have. And, so when you have that interaction, just because the doctor's treating me for ADHD, the VA said, hey, you have ADHD. This is obviously not PTSD or TBI related. So now I have to go and schedule an appointment with neuropsychiatry. I call into the GP, who is a walking piece of feces. I'll have to give you a separate video on this later and explain why I feel the way I do about her. But she's an atrocious doctor who does not need to be practicing medicine. I call in and she says, hey, why do you need this appointment? And I tell her, well, I don't think I have ADHD because the VA says adult onset ADHD doesn't exist. And I never had ADHD as a kid. Like, I didn't even have any of the issues or symptoms that are normal for kids with ADHD. And I didn't have any that are normal for people who have adult onset ADHD. And that's more because, there are people who think that exists and there are people who think it doesn't. And I said, given my exposure to IEDs, RPGs, and just getting my head rocked a few times, I'd like to know if it's a TBI or PTSD. I just am trying to figure out what's going on here. And she said, Mr. June, when you came in here the first time, you told us you had never experienced any TBIs. Why did you say that? Now, honestly, I don't remember the first time I walked into that clinic. It was almost 15 years ago. I was young. I was dumb. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. There was a lot of just get the paperwork done so I could move on. So maybe I did say I didn't have any TBIs. Maybe I didn't. And we actually even had that discussion. I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, I'm looking at your questionnaire right here. And it says that you said you didn't do it. And I'm like, well, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you I don't remember that. Uh, you know, this was 15 years ago. And I genuinely don't remember doing a questionnaire in which I was asked about TBIs. And she got a little combative and just continuously kept asking why I needed the appointment. Like, why do you need this? Why do you need this? Why do you need this? And finally, I just said, look, maybe it's possible as I've gotten older, my understanding of what a TBI is has changed. And I don't understand why this is such a big fucking deal. It's not like you have to pay for it, it doesn't come out of your paycheck. They don't pay you less because you send me for these tests. So just give me the appointment so we can both hang up and we can move on with our lives. She tells me I have to go to neuropsychiatry before I can get any kind of scans, which is fine. So we fast forward to the neuropsych appointment. I wasn't prepared for that to be an all day affair. I didn't know what I was getting into. It just said, hey, here's your appointment. This is in Chicago. Uh, cool. I love Chicago. It's my favorite Midwestern shithole. Love it. I went through the testing. I got my results back, and then a couple weeks later, she called and we discussed them. Basically, I'm on the low end of average for an adult of my age, but everything checks out outside of one or two tests where I scored so poorly that they don't want to use the results. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And she said, well, they're bad enough that we don't know if this is like a fluke, if this is, and I was like, me intentionally throwing the test. And she was like, well, I didn't want to say that. But yeah, I mean, that's also part of it. And I was like, yeah, that checks out. Like, I'm trying to get help, and the VA is just like, you're faking. Sure. But anyway, I was on the low end of average. And I told her, I said, hey, I get it. The VA's a stance on this is going to be, well, you're within the acceptable range. You're fine. I said, but what I need to figure out is why I'm not where I was. I'm not the smartest man in the world, but I'm definitely not on the low end of average. And I know a lot of people are going to say that, hey, I'm also not an idiot. And, by and large, I think we're all idiots. Like, you're an idiot, I'm an idiot, and that's okay. But if I can tell that I have a lower cognitive function, if my memory's getting worse, if my focus is getting worse, and I'm telling you it's getting worse, and now we're on the low end of average after I'm telling you it's getting worse, maybe we should look into this a little more. And then I also remind her that I'm on 15 milligrams of Adderall, which I did take that day, mostly because I had never missed a dose and I didn't want to find out what would happen the day I had to take a neuropsych test. And that she was very receptive to. And she was like, oh, I did forget about that because we talked about it in the office. And she was like, let me go ahead and add that to your results, like just a little note here, so that they know that when you took these tests, you were on your prescription medication. After we got done and we talked about, the results and everything else, she told me that she would recommend psychotherapy to try to determine the cause of everything, which in my head didn't really make sense. But, I'm just going to do what the doctors say first. And also that I should reach out to my GP to schedule brain scans. And I couldn't tell you which ones. I don't know. They start talking about like CAT scans, CT scans, MRIs, all that. It's literally all the same to me. I just know she was like, hey, you should probably call your doctor, start setting these appointments up too if you can. But she did also say, hey, but the one thing I can confidently tell you is that this is not ADHD. Like, you don't have all of the classic, like, physical symptoms. I'm more inclined to believe that this is directly correlated to trauma and brain injury, and that I can confidently, 100% unequivocally tell you this is not attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So, my first step was to schedule the appointment with the counselor. His name was Chris, probably still is. I haven't talked to him since. We did get along pretty well, but within 10 minutes of the conversation, he was like, oh, this sounds like adult onset ADHD, and I can't really help you with that. What the fuck? How does one department of the VA point blank look at me and tell me there's no such thing as adult onset ADHD, only for me to be told that I have adult onset ADHD by a different department in the VA? I would think at some point these doctors, who are all psychiatrists and or psychologists, not doctors but counselors, could get on the same page so that they could all at least go, hey, uh, I've told this guy that this isn't real, so please don't tell him that it is. And so now I'm being told two very different contradictory things. And it's been a joyride, to say the least. I mean, this is all coming from the same organization, under the same roof, in the same city. This isn't like I saw a counselor or a psychiatrist in Indianapolis and then another one in Chicago. Like, this is all in one roof, all in one district. They all have the same boss. And it's infuriating. And then I get done with everything, and I've been in direct contact with the head psychiatrist of the Crown Point VA, because that's who's prescribing me the Adderall. And then he's now moved me to a different psychiatrist because he's the head and he doesn't do patient care, and that's fine. So he slides me over to another psychiatrist, and I tell her, hey, look, like, here's the results from my neuropsych. Here's the page they start on in this document. Here's the page they end in this document. Here's a general overview of what it says. I'm just trying to figure out what my next course of action should be. Her response was, and this is a direct quote, and this is the only response I got. And actually, there was a little bit more I had said. I had said the last sentence. I had asked, hey, I've now spoken to about 4 or 5 different counselors and or psychiatrists. Who am I supposed to be talking to with regard to psychotherapy and what my next steps are? In addition, here's my results. And I'm asking you if you know what my next steps are. So if you don't know what they are, can you tell me who does? It was very pointed. It was very direct. I was not like subliminally trying to do anything. Like, it was very, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help me? Can you tell me who can help me? Her response said, I have looked at the results and there is really nothing found. So we have to continue the current treatment and with psychotherapy. So I emailed her back and I said, hey, look, this says the low end of average. And I was on Adderall for this test. I'll go back and take it again without the Adderall, and you guys can see where I'm at. So I email her back and I said, hey, I understand that you're taking care of quite a few patients. I understand that I'm not the only patient that you have. What I don't understand is why you can't take the time to answer my question. I said, if you're busy, don't bother responding to me until you have the time, or just send me a response that says, I don't have the time to dig into this right now, but I will get back to you at a later date. But you completely ignored the questions that I asked about starting treatment. Who do I get treatment with? What's my next steps? What's my next course of actions? Like, I pointedly asked you these questions and you did not answer them. Her response was, it was a little defensive, and at that point I can kind of get it, because again, it's text, it's email, but I assume my tone probably felt a little shitty, and I was getting a little irritated and frustrated. And I even told her, like, look, I'm getting very frustrated. I've spoken to all these different people. Nobody can tell me anything. I just am trying to figure out what my next course of action is, blah, 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 blah. Her response was, let's address all of your issues one at a time. Okay, cool. So she does a numbered list, right? It's just like number 1. You said I didn't answer your question. I answered your question. Lady, you didn't even tell me what my question was. You haven't even reiterated to me that I even asked a question. So how could you have answered it? And then she said, number 2. And I'm trying to remember exactly what number 2 was. It was kind of weird because it had a lot to do with like doctors and treatments and psychiatry. But the long and short of it was basically like, we can just find you another psychiatrist. Okay. If that's what we got to do. And then her last issue that she wanted to resolve with me was that if you don't have ADHD, how about I just take you off your Adderall? So again, very defensive in tone, kind of shitty, kind of like, I got you good, you fucker, like that kind of tone. And it's just like, I'm just trying to get answers. Why are you getting this way? Like, why are you getting combative? And again, I had to email her back, which I haven't gotten a response back yet. But my email to her this time was like, hey, maybe I'm not communicating effectively. Maybe I'm not speaking clearly. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong. And that's usually the approach I take when people start getting combative with me is I'm like, look, maybe this is my fault, but then I will just rip into you in the nicest way possible. So it was just like, oh, maybe I'm not communicating, but I absolutely asked you a question that you did not answer. And then I scrolled down to the message where I asked it, copied it, pasted it in quotation marks, and said, I asked this question in my first message to you, and you have yet to respond to it. And I can dig through every message back and forth between us, and I can copy and paste every message between us and show you that you have not responded to it. So, no, you haven't addressed my issue. You haven't answered my question. As for me getting a different psychiatrist, you're the doctor, whatever you feel is best. If you don't feel like you can help me, that's fine. I just want to know what I'm supposed to do. And if you can't tell me that, then maybe I should go ahead and get a different psychiatrist. But you're the doctor, you tell me. It's all on you. And then the last question, we'll just take you off the Adderall. And I was just like, hey, look, if that's what you feel like is the best course of action in your expert medical and mental health opinion, then I'm behind you 100%. If you want to just take me off the Adderall, let's do it right now. Don't care. Like, why are you threatening me and threatening to take away the medication that helps me function on a daily basis simply because you can't be bothered to get off your fat ass and help me out and help me find the answers? Like, you don't even have to help me. You can just push me off on somebody else who will help me. Like, if you don't like me and you don't want to deal with me, just push me to somebody else. Too easy. So that's where we're at. And so, like, if you talk to a veteran and they have negative things to say about the VA, just understand that this is some of the experiences that we go through. And honestly, like, not to sound dramatic, but I am in no way surprised that the suicide rate with veterans is higher than most people because they have to deal with this type of bullshit. So it's just one of those where if you've ever had to experience the VA, my heart goes out to you. I'm sorry. Sometimes they get it very right, sometimes they get it very wrong. My experience with the VA is that there's no middle ground. They are either in your corner and trying to get you everything you need, or they are just like kicking sand up into your eyes and spitting on you and telling you you're a piece of shit. And bro, I just want some average, middle of the road, goddamn healthcare. That's it. I just want a doctor to go, hey man, uh, this is, we don't know what's going on with you, but here's the steps we can take to try to figure it out. Rather than just like push me off on somebody else, give me circular conversations and logic in which people are like, well, you can't have this, it doesn't exist. Oh, but actually it does exist and you definitely have this. So again, you know, just wanted to kind of share that story with everybody. If you didn't read the long like blog post, this is a long video, but it's still kind of the Cliff Notes version. Thank you.